That's right, yeah.
Did you have any opportunity to
Yeah.
work with all the dynamic between them?
Well,
Was she sort of a muse for him?
well, here's some things I do know. When I was shooting that scene, when I was on the floor with the ruler holding down the black glove, which was kind of a more emotionally intensive scene. So I was kind of like getting into character, so to speak, and concentrating, genuinely wanting to concentrate on the psychological aspects of somebody who's obviously in a severe psychological situation. And I was kind of down on the floor looking at the ground, and then I saw like these high heels or some kind of heeled shoes walk in with and hard shoes, and it was David Lynch with Isabella Rossellini, and he kind of like interrupted the concentration. He said, "Crispin, I want you to meet Isabella." So it's kind of like a weird time. But so then I met her, and then I went back to get into the concentration. He was funny though, because he's a great director. I don't mean to say anything negative, because I don't mean it negatively, but it's a funny way that he was. Like during that scene, I could hear him audibly making sounds, like kind of laughing or doing things that were distracting actually to concentrate. But yeah, I mean, it didn't matter. He's because he's a great director. It's supportive ultimately. But I think that Mary Sweeney, who he ended up later marrying, was the script supervisor on this film. And then she ended up, doing producing of later film. I think she produced Straight Story that Harry Dean Stanton was in. So, I don't know all of these details, but that's what I experienced. Yes, you have a question.
You have a reputation as an eccentric artist and actor, yet sometimes you appear in extremely mainstream movies like The Twister, Charlie's Angels, and Hot Tub Time Machine.
Oh, just to be clear, the Twister that I think you're referring to is a different Twister than I was in. I was in a small, so-called independent film with Harry Dean Stanton called Twister, but it's not the. But I know what you're saying. And anyhow, I am in some big corporate
In those situations, are you auditioning for those roles, or are they saying, "Hey, let's get Crispin Glover"?
It depends on the film. I can't remember which one you said. Charlie's Angels, they came to me. They wanted me to be in that film. I didn't audition for it. What were the other ones you mentioned? Hot Tub Time Machine, they came to me. I'm very willing to audition if it comes to it. But it doesn't happen too often. Sometimes it does, but usually I'm offered things. And I'm perfectly willing to audition, especially if it's something that is a bit different from what I'm used to being cast in. But a lot of those bigger films, in fact, all of those that you mentioned are things that came to me. You have a question. Yeah, 9 was voice work, and I did a kids thing. I always forget the name of it, but they both came to me. Sometimes people think that Beowulf was voice work, but that's not. That was a motion capture, and you're on a sound stage with all of the actors in the scene, and you act out the scene, and then they did digital work on top of it. That was something that it was a strange situation with that one, because that was directed by Robert Zemeckis, who directed Back to the Future, and there had been a lawsuit because I was not in the, it's kind of an opening can of worms to talk about it, but it's, I was only in the first Back to the Future film. Sometimes people are mixed up believing that I was in the second film. But what they've done is they've taken casts of my face from the original film that were used for old age makeup. And they made the features of my face into prosthetics and they put them onto a different actor.
Yeah.
And then they interspliced footage of me from the original film with this other actor in order to fool audiences into believing that I was in the second film. We had not come to an agreement. The first film that I was talking about that I made, called What Is It, when I was talking about questions, I had questions about a moral element at the end of Back to the Future that had to do with money being a reward for the characters, which I thought was a negative aspect. I didn't think the characters should have a financial reward illustrated. And this got the producers very angry at me. I was 20 years old at the time, and I auditioned for the part just with a single scene. I wasn't given the entire screenplay. So I was asking a lot of questions when we were shooting, particularly about that, which it made the producers not happy with me because I was asking these questions. It led to me not being in the sequels and then putting another actor into this makeup. Because of my lawsuit, there are rules in the Screen Actors Guild that make it so producers can't do that kind of thing again. Well, that had happened, and then I got this query years later that Robert Zemeckis was interested in me to play Grendel in Beowulf, which is a great part. It took me aback, really. I never thought I would ever work with Robert Zemeckis again. But he did want me to come in and audition. I think what the psychology of it was he wanted to see if I was going to be, amenable to acting, or if I was going to be, angry. And, I really thought about it. I had a switch in how I was thinking about acting in films because I fund my own films now. There's a very different way that I approach getting roles or how I accept roles. But I realized that this was a good part. It would be something that would help me continue to fund my filmmaking, and it made sense to do it. But I did read for that part, and I got it. And I had a very good experience working on it. I actually like that film. There are technical aspects that can be critiqued, but I think the writing was written by Neil Gaiman and Roger Avery. They're actually the reason that I was in the film. Roger Avery was originally going to direct it. He wrote it for himself to direct. And then Steve Bing produced it. He's independently wealthy and financed it out of his pocket. And then Zemeckis was able to buy the script from Roger Avery. But part of what Roger Avery had said was, or I think what Zemeckis actually wanted it was to get who the people that were on their list of actors to play the parts, and I was on the list for playing Grendel from Roger Avery, and Robert Zemeckis respected it. So even though we have this history, so it was interesting. I had a very good experience on that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been very nice. Yeah.
That's good. And I'm just wondering, kind of what you thought about Kentucky and you're at the big Tuesday, and then you're here like your name is actually from West Urban.
That's right.
Which is, I want to get to that one. I mean, it's the beginning of Appalachia mountain thing is actually beautiful. I'll just say last
Great.
Because you're here for hearing, you know?
Yes.
Pretty much. And where he's actually from is gorgeous. Great.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
But, you know, also congratulations on Los Angeles, here in Manchester.
Yes.
What's your vibe on?
Well, I've been once in Kentucky before I had a 35 millimeter print of, what is it, I had done a brief touring of it on video, and I was at a college in Louisville. And I don't remember which college it was, though, but I remember flying in. It was a while, that was in the 90s. I'd been working on that film for a long time, but I remember flying into the hilly area and found it very beautiful. I found a lot of it, the Paducah was very quaint, and I walked down over to the kind of river and saw the historical signage, and it was really, really interesting. I'm enjoying it. You know, and I like old architecture. I like coming into, I've been touring all over this, you know, the U.S. and Canada, all over the world, and you know, a lot of the things I see are these old venues. This is a particularly, I went into the one next door. It's a really beautiful venue in these older vaudeville era venues. Even if they were telling me back in the office that the next door in the bigger auditorium, it was not specifically built as a vaudeville venue. It was a silent era venue. But it was built, I think, 22 or 26, and I think it was 22. And but you can tell that anything built at that time period would have genuinely been used as a vaudeville era venue. And when I play in those venues, I can feel that they were made for live theater events. Modern venues, there's just different thing about sight lines and sound lines, and they're not the same. But that particularly that auditorium next door, you can just tell it's really beautifully designed. But I've been touring around for 8 years now, and I really like coming to places that I've never been before. And you know, after the shows, I always have the book signings, and there till the last person is there, and I talk to people. I don't just like have my head down and sign and do it. I talk to people and get a sense of what the communities are like, and it's great today. I'm really enjoying it. So yes, I'm glad to be here. I really genuinely want to come back. I particularly like to come to this venue. Yes.
I know you have to switch gears when you ask all the different questions. Do you know Gina Lynn? Do you remember how Gina Lynn got a role in Willard? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Oh, did she play my mother?
She's a porn actress. It's been years since I've seen the film, but she was really a porn actress in the 90s, and she had a few.
Right.
Do you think it had something to do with casting over
No. I do know who you're talking about, but I'm forgetting. She played the secretary to the boss. No, I remember that with Glenn Morgan and James Wong, the
It was like her
producer.
first and only, her only film, and it was pretty big for her.
I didn't know who she was, but I remember them talking about her, and they knew her from something, and they cast her. But I had nothing to do with her.
Super random. I'm into porn, so that's how I'm into you too, but I mean,
Fair enough.
maybe it's just a random person.
Well, thank you. Yes.
I have actually two questions.
Okay.
The first one is, how did they train the mice in Willard?
Yes. And I had a lot of really emotional scenes with the rats in Willard, and what was great about them is that I also worked with a dog and a cat in that film, and the rats were so easy to work with. Easy is it's actually not the right word. they were far more professional than most actors that but the reason, and like, but the dog and the cat, you know, they're nice animals, but to work with a dog and a cat is not reliable at all. The reason is because if you think about it, how does a dog and a cat survive? They're domesticated animals that, you know, they can lie down or run around or whatever, they get fed. Whereas a rat scurries for food and they have to figure out particular patterns. They don't live that long, I think 3 or 4 years at the most. And so they can be trained from a young age. So like I had a scene where I was supposed to be killing myself, or about to kill myself, and I was going to like cut my wrist, and then I got this white rat on my shoulder, and that rat had been trained to sit. That's all it was trained to do. Then there was another rat that had been trained to scurry down to a blade on the wrist. And this was an emotional scene. So they kind of talked to me about how I thought it would be best to do it, and I thought it was just best to freeze. Person walks onto the camera, they would cut to something in the freeze. And like, you know, I was in an emotional state. And then the camera runs, and then it keeps running, and then the rat ran down. I had a few emotional scenes like that, always involving the rats. Not a single take ever was messed up by a rat at all. They did it perfectly every single time, never one mistake. Which in an emotional scene like that, it would be really horrible to have to like, if it was with a dog or a cat, it would have been literally impossible. I couldn't have kept that kind of emotional element going. It would have been very difficult. So the rats were very well trained.
My second question is, what was it like meeting Johnny Carson?
Oh, he was great. Yeah, I had been. I went on with Johnny Carson twice in a row. They finally just put the second episode up on YouTube, and he was, you know, there's a certain trend, a style of interviewing that has become more commonplace, which is a bit more. Well, it has a little bit to do with the propaganda I was talking about in media. But if you look at old talk shows from the 1970s, somebody like Johnny Carson or what's the other guy?
Jack Barr.
There's a whole bunch of stuff on him of YouTube interviewing people like Orson Welles, Woody Allen, John Wayne. Who? Yeah.
Oh, right.
Dick Cavett.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, Dick Cavett, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you watch Dick Cavett, or a lot of these shows from the 70s, you know, there's pauses and there's awkwardness, people, you know, make mistakes, but someone like Dick Cavett, who's extremely witty, or Johnny Carson, who's funny and nice and supportive of certain kinds of eccentricities, which, like I was saying, lead into thoughtfulness, lead into possible questions. And a more contemporary style is more controlled. There are pre-interviews given, and then it's a very tight kind of segment that relies more on the cult of the personality of the talk show host. I go into a lot of detail about these things when I do my Q&A sessions, but for my own films, but I see very specifically a purposeful kind of tightening of media that controls it in a way that I would very specifically call it propaganda. But Johnny Carson was earlier than that. Of course, he was retired at a certain point. But he definitely appreciated eccentricity and wanted to support it. He made eccentricity look good. You'll find that later and contemporary talk show hosts often will be aggressively trying to like point out in a negative fashion or make fun of eccentricity, which is, like I say, I feel it's a form of a controlling element that doesn't really want people to think. The media doesn't want a thoughtful questioning culture because ultimately the media is run by corporate interests, and corporate interests know if there's a thoughtful questioning culture, it can, that thoughtful culture can question the existence out of controlled corporations. So, I don't know, I'm not explaining it particularly well because it's, we're in a different atmosphere than my own shows, but Johnny Carson was great. He was
Yeah.
really great. Yes.
Crispin, I love your father from the time he was in James Bond movie and
Yeah.
all the TV shows he was in. How's he doing today?
He's doing well. In fact, the sets that I'm building right now in the Czech Republic are for a project for he and I to act in together. We've never acted together before. He's 82, and he's in good shape. So, but you know, this is the time to make that happen. And I think what Harry Dean Stanton is how old now? 86. So yeah, it's these are the times when you want to talk to people like that and be around them. So it's good that